I spent some time with Tom Homan in D.C. over the inaugural weekend, and we talked about the deportation, mass deportations. And I asked him, why is it you keep saying only the most violent offenders first? I said, what you're doing, if you don't get everybody else out, is you're saying to illegal aliens around the world, potential illegal aliens around the world, come to America, just don't do anything violent and you're home free. He said, you're right. And he said, everybody who's in the country illegally is on the table. We have limited resources. We're going to go get the low-hanging fruit first. But he said, everybody who's in the country illegally is on the table precisely for that reason. They violated the law when they came into the country. And if we don't give them consequences, we're sending a green light to everybody in the world who wants to come here illegally. Come on, just don't do anything real violent when you get here and you're home free. It is the same point that Scott Jennings, the resident Republican on CNN, made. Number 3.
So the populations that they are starting with are violent, criminal, illegal aliens. Then they also have 1.5 million people who have existing, fully adjudicated orders. And beyond that, I would just point out that if you came to this country illegally, you're already a criminal, illegal immigrant. You've already broken our laws, even if you haven't been arrested yet or charged with it. If you're here illegally, if you broke our laws, then you're going to be targeted. Now, maybe you're not going to be a top priority today because there's other more dangerous people here, but we cannot send a message that, well, some illegal immigration is okay. And that's been the problem of the last 4 years. Basically, Biden and Harris were like, just get here and it'll probably work out for you. That is no longer the communication strategy of the U.S. government. The strategy is, don't try us. Whether you're the president of Colombia or somebody who just walked across the border illegally, do not try us. It is not going to work out for you, period.
And there are all sorts of stories about Chinese putting their kids on a plane, hospital in California, or putting their pregnant wife on a plane, hospital in California, she gives birth, and the kid is a automatic American citizen, and they have dual citizenship in China and in the U.S. Here's what Trey Gowdy said about all of this. Number 2.
Well, that didn't take long. President Donald Trump hit the ground running on immigration. He sent troops to the border and unlawful immigrants home. ICE agents are in action across the country, and President Trump is keeping his promise as it relates to deportations. He also issued a challenge to birthright citizenship. To be clear, the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868 and provides in pertinent part all persons born in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. No one envisioned people flying to the U.S. to have a child in a California hotel only to then petition for the rest of the family to join them. The Supreme Court, however, did take an expansive view of the 14th Amendment, and consequently, we've had birthright citizenship coupled with chain migration ever since. The Supreme Court may be clear, but the Constitution is not, and the court can and does change its collective mind from time to time. Trump's executive order was challenged immediately in court, and this issue will ultimately be resolved by the court or by another amendment.
And that is exactly how I see it. We talked about this last week. The drafter of the 14th Amendment specifically said this does not apply to people who are here in the country illegally and who have a child. Does not apply. Now, it's been interpreted differently, and there is a Supreme Court case that some of the people that claim birthright citizenship will cite. But in that case, the parents were here legally. They had temporary legal status. They were not in the country illegally, so it doesn't even apply, but that's the one that's often used. So, the AG of California bragged over the weekend that he had already sued Donald Trump over the executive order redefining birthright citizenship, and bragged that he had sued Donald Trump when he was president the first time over 100 times. And as you know, the lawmakers here in California just drafted a bill to spend $50 million to Trump-proof California, that is to provide all sorts of legal assistance and services to people who are here illegally, who are under deportation orders. So this is going to be challenged. His executive order is going to be challenged, already has been. A judge in Seattle already put a stop temporarily on the implementation of Trump's executive order. And that eventually will work its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I predict that the Supreme Court, probably 6-3, will interpret the 14th Amendment as the drafter intended, which is to confer citizenship immediately to newly freed slaves, not to people in the country illegally who have a child. But that is how it's been interpreted, and that is why the judge in Seattle said it was blatantly unconstitutional what Donald Trump did. Blatantly unconstitutional. But as I said last hour, Barack Obama, at first saying he does not have the power to grant legal status to illegal aliens, and then turns around and does it anyway, that was not blatantly unconstitutional. Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats at the time saying that we don't have the power, the president doesn't have the power to forgive student debt, and then Biden does it. It's challenged. The Supreme Court says, no, Biden, what you did is unconstitutional. Biden changed the language a little bit, did it again, got challenged. The Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional. And before he left, Biden did it again. The people that are concerned about Donald Trump's executive orders, calling them blatantly unconstitutional, they didn't say jack over DACA, didn't say jack over student debt forgiveness. But Donald Trump legitimately interprets the 14th Amendment as the drafter intended, and he's called an imperial president. These people are just too much. Double standard. And on his pardon, there's a guy named Elie Mystal. He's one of the wackier pundits on MSNBC Hee Haw. The January 6th pardon, he says it's what white folks voted for. Number 9.
I would love for Democrats to speak with a clear voice with this, right? I would love for John Fetterman to not be taking pictures with pardoned terrorists, but that's not the Democratic Party we have right now. So while, yes, there are some Republicans who are squeamish, I guess, about releasing convicted felons and cop abusers back into the general population, and while Democrats generally are like, well, that's clearly wrong, we shouldn't do that. Nothing's actually happening with it. Nothing's actually going to stop these people. Again, this is what Trump promised. This is what white folks voted for. And this is what you normalize whenever you act like Trump is a regular, normal president who just has a different point of view than you do, right?
This is what white folks voted for. Trump got 18% of the black vote, a higher percentage than any Republican in decades. This is what white folks voted for. Cop abusers. Same guy who was defending Black Lives Matter, George Floyd protesters. 25 people were killed. 2,000 police officers were injured. Where was all this concern about cop abusers then? In the case of January 6th, those who assaulted police officers were arrested and they were put in prison. Some as long as almost 4 years. At least there were consequences. And even if you pardon them or commute them, you don't give back the time they spent in prison. They still spent the time in prison. So they were not let go without any consequences. But during the 4 months of the George Floyd riots, again, 2,000 officers injured, 25 people killed, $2 billion in property damage. That's insured property damage. Maybe another $1 billion or $2 billion in uninsured property damage. And you had Kamala Harris retweeting a fund to bail out the protesters who were arrested, some of whom were violent protesters. And she goes on television and she says they're not going to stop. And they shouldn't stop. And the whole thing about the George Floyd protests and riots had to do with the fact that George Floyd is black. Zero evidence that Officer Derek Chauvin did what he did because of George Floyd's race. He was never even charged with a hate crime. And as I've said many times, the lead prosecutor was black. And he took pains in his opening statement to say the police in general are not on trial. The Minneapolis PD in general is not on trial. This individual is on trial for what he did and didn't do to George Floyd. He never even implied that the officer was motivated because of George Floyd's race. Yet 4 months of protests, some violent, all this destruction because of an assumption that what happened to George Floyd had to do with his race. Incredible. Thanks for watching these clips from The Larry Elder Show. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment. More thought-provoking discussions are just a click away, so stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.